A failed hero turns into a monster after getting attacked by a parasite, but pretends to be normal. Kafka lives in a world where monsters named Kaijus are a constant threat to humanity, but mankind has learned to live with this issue and have created a special force to deal with these monsters. One day, another kaiju appears out of nowhere from the sea and attacks the port, threatening the city with floods, while an emergency announcement is released for people to get in the underground shelters for their safety. The monster turns out to be a 60 m tall behemoth who causes destruction in the entire city as he walks through the building. While the people of the area could do nothing but watch helplessly, the government immediately sends in the defense force, who surround the kaiju from all sides and shoot missiles at it after making sure the area has been evacuated. This entire sequence is televised all over the country, where people watch it online and wonder which division will fight the monster. This time, it's the special forces from the 3rd Division that get mobilized this time, and a couple of soldiers emerge from the chopper with special weapons and dive down on the nearby buildings. The kaiju continues to destroy anything that comes in his way, but now the 3rd Division lays down suppressing fire, distracting the monster and injuring it, while some of them run directly at the beast, shooting at it while dodging its deadly attacks with ease. Taking advantage of this distraction, their team leader, who was ready with a hand cannon, shoots a blast at the kaiju, hitting it directly in the heart, taking its life in an instant. The kaiju bubbles up and explodes into a bloody mess, while the team leader watches as blood falls all around her. Later that day, Kafka looks at the mess through a binoculars while eating his lunch, thinking about how much work they will have to do to clean everything up. Meanwhile, the citizens are cheering for the 3rd Division as they eliminated the kaiju with 0 casualties, and in a very small amount of time, Kafka arrived at the location, looking at the giant crowd as they cheer for the defense group, while no one pays any attention to him as he walks past them towards the dead monster. This is because he is a cleaner whose job begins after the battles are over, and they do all the dirty work, while the people who create all this mess are celebrated as heroes. He climbs on top of the carcass and starts dissecting the beast into smaller pieces to clean everything up, while a drone comes over to collect some of the samples. He asks his fellow teammates to get him a heated chainsaw when he notices that one of the newbies was trying to hoist up the intestine of the monster, which is very dangerous. He shouts at the man to back off immediately, but it was too late, as the intestine ends up bursting and the man ends up getting hurt. In the process, Kafka immediately comes down and runs towards him and applies first aid, as he has seen these injuries before and knows how to deal with them. He then looks at the remaining carcass and wonders about how the hell are they going to clean everything within a week. But before he could do anything, his supervisor tells him that he is needed to attend a different part of the kaiju, which turns out to be the intestines, which is the most dangerous and dirty part of the job. Regardless of how much he hates this work, Kafka gives his all and dives head first into the intestines to clean it up later that night. He returns back to his room, which is pretty dirty for a guy whose entire job is cleaning things up. He tries to get the smell of the intestines out of his nose, but after failing to do so, he notices the program on the TV showing the leader of the 3rd Division, known as Mina, who is so incredibly talented that just at the age of 27, not only did she become the captain of her division, but has also slayed close to 100 kaijus. This makes
Kafka remember his past, as it turns out that Mina and him were childhood friends who once made a promise to each other that they will eliminate the kaijus from the earth as they overlook the death and destruction caused by them. He snaps back to reality as the reporter claims that her popularity has made her a very strong candidate to become a future commander of the defense forces. He shuts the television as it was getting too depressing, but he reminds himself that cleaning is also a very important job.
And because of his job, he is able to live in a decent apartment and eat whatever he wants to eat the next morning. He heads back to work when his colleagues call him over to introduce a new part-time student that is going to intern with them. He tells Kafka that this kid is named Ikai and has the dream of becoming the member of the defense force, which is coincidentally the same dream that Kafka had when he was younger, but he eventually gave up on his dream and is now a veteran in the cleaning industry. Kafka turns around embarrassed and starts shuffling through his locker when EAI asks, why did he abandon his dream? Kafka replies that he tried his best, but there is always someone that will be better and one step ahead, and also claims that Ekai will understand that as he grows older. To his surprise, Ekai straight up tells him that he will never give up on his dream and moves away to get changed, while Kafka thinks about how he would have looked bad no matter how he replied to that question. Later that day, they get back to the site and the supervisor starts assigning them their duties for the day and puts EAI in the group to clean the intestines, which makes Kafka happy for a moment, as this will teach Ekai how difficult their job is. But the supervisor tells Kafka that he will also be working on the intestines, as he is the best at that job. Kafka cries at his bad fortune, but immediately gets to work, while the supervisor tells Ekai that Kafka complains a lot, but he is an excellent worker and that he would have made an excellent officer if he was able to clear the exam. Later that day, they all have their lunch break, where EAI has totally lost his appetite, which makes Kafka happy, but he had it just as bad and tries not to puke. He notices that EAI is not eating anything, so he throws a vitamin drink at his face and tells him to drink it, while also offering him a pair of nose plugs to keep out the stench. Ekai refuses to follow his advice, but Kafka ends up forcing him to do as he says. Later that day, everyone finishes up their work and leaves, while Kafka does one final check, noticing that the worst parts have been cleaned. AI arrives behind him and thanks him for helping him throughout the day, as without him, the day would have been much harder. Moreover, he tells Kafka that the age limit for the Defense Force exams have been relaxed to 33 years, and even though it is none of his business, he thinks that Kafka should try reappearing in the exam. After that, Ekai begins leaving, but Kafka stops him to say that he is a good kid, embarrassing Ekai, but suddenly a kaiju appears right behind him from the ground and would have killed Ekai if not for Kafka, who risked his life to push him out of the way. They both fall over to the ground, injured when Ekai tries to get up, but is swatted aside by the monster. Kafka shouts at him to run away as fast as possible and call the defense force, but Ekai refuses to leave him alone. Kafka tells him that he can never be in the force if he dies here, which convinces Ekai to call for help, while Kafka grabs a rod and with a smile on his face distracts the monster. While running away, he runs through the deserted streets, littered with broken buildings from the last attack, while the kaiju follows at full speed and would have killed him. But Kafka enters a narrow doorway where the kaiju is unable to follow.
Kafka runs straight ahead without looking back and jumps out of the window, getting slashed on his face when he suddenly remembers how Mina was sad because a cat she knew died in the attack, but Kafka tries to cheer her up, and later they both make a promise with each other to join the defense forces together and eliminate all the kaijus from the face of the earth. He snaps back to reality and wonders where it all went wrong while the monster starts gaining up on him. Kafka decides to take a stand and makes a plan to attack the legs, but the kaiju is way too fast and strikes at him before he could react, throwing up in the air as his entire life flashes in front of him. He falls to the ground while the kaiju smashes his leg with its hand, leaving Kafka no choice but to accept his fate and die just as the kaiju was about to delete Kafka from this planet. Ikai arrives out of nowhere with an iron rod and hits it in the face, saving Kafka's life. Kafka shouts at him to run away, but EI claims that he has notified the defense group already and claims that he could never become an officer. If he can't even save someone's life, the kaiju starts attacking the young man, while Kafka wonders why the hell is he so weak and useless. He realizes that nothing has changed in his life, and even now he cannot save a single person, even though he dreamed of being an officer just as the K was about to end both Kafka and Yai's life. A white tiger appears out of nowhere and starts attacking the monster, causing it to explode and die on the spot. Suddenly, Kafka hears Mina's voice
as she assigns her teammates different roles, telling them to secure the perimeter and take care of the injured people while she searches the area for any other monsters. Kafka ends up losing consciousness and wakes up in the hospital at night, where he thinks about how Mina has achieved her goal and reached at a position where Kafka can never even think to follow her. He was feeling miserable when Ekai calls his name, and he realizes that he is not alone. Ekai thanks him for saving his life and telling him to run away, before claiming that he thinks Kafka should really try to be a defense force officer, as he would be really good at that job. Kafka thinks about it, and with a new sense of inspiration, he decides to appear in the next exam for the defense force when he suddenly notices something weird flying around before he could scream about the kaiju. In his compartment, the monster rushes in and lodges himself deep into his throat, muffling his screams as Ekai realizes that something is wrong and rushes to check up on him. To his absolute horror, Kafka looks at himself in the window, only to realize that he has been turned into a kaiju himself. He screams at Ekai that he is Kafka, while Ekai is too stunned to say a word, but an old man from the hospital spots them and immediately starts calling the defense forces, while Kafka worries about how to save his life. The defense forces are immediately alerted, and Mina assembles a team of kaiju hunters, while an alert is sounded for everyone to stay indoors and lock their doors, as a small kaiju has been sighted back at the hospital. Ekai can't believe what he is witnessing and wonders whether Kafka got devoured by a kaiju, but it becomes immediately apparent that the kaiju is none other than Kafka. The old man who saw everything starts freaking out while Ekai tells Kafka that they need to make her, the old guy, understand that they will not harm him. To do this, Kafka decides to try cry and smile, but the old man gets a heart attack just looking at his hideous face and lies down on the ground, shaking with fear. Kafka quickly goes over to check whether the old hag is okay, but to his surprise he is so strong that he breaks the wall of the room just by touching it. He gets scared himself and realizes that he is totally becoming a kaiju.
This arouses the other patients who come over to check only to be scared by Kafka in his hideous monster form. Akai tells Kafka that they don't have a lot of time as the defense forces must on their way to the hospital, so they both decide to flee the scene. Kafka immediately heads out to the window and tries to open it. Unfortunately, because of his strength, he completely destroys the window. In the process, he gets really impressed by his own strength, but EI tells him this is not the time for that, and he jumps out the window. Kafka tries to jump out as well, but his jump is so strong that he falls somewhere far away. Akai starts running down the street to try and find Kafka when he suddenly spots him following him down the street. To his horror, Kafka doesn't even look like the normal Kaiju now, and has gotten even uglier, with weird tentacles coming out of his body. Akai asks whether he knows how to control them, but he claims that he can't control anything. Just then, his tongue shoots out of his mouth and catches a bird before eating it alive, which really impresses Kafka, as he always wanted to be Venom, but Akai finds it disgusting and tells him to get a hold of himself. Somehow he manages to revert back to the normal Kaiju form, and they start running to find a place to hide when Kafka tells Akai that he really wants to pee. Akai tells him to hold it in, as they don't have the time, but Kafka is unable to hold it and ends up peeing out of his chest. This really embarrasses Kafka, who realizes that he is never going to get married and will die a virgin if anyone gets to know about it. Kai tells him that they have other stuff to worry about and tries to drag him. Kafka stays on the ground and asks Akai whether he thinks he can join the defense force. Even now, Akai immediately shakes his head, claiming it's impossible as they will kill him on sight. Kafka starts going through a midlife crisis, realizing that his dream will always stay a dream and that he can never catch up to Mina. Akai ends up finding an abandoned construction site and tells Kafka that they should be safe here if they hide, but just then Kafka gets a weird feeling about something coming from below the ground, and suddenly there is a huge explosion on the other side of
the city. Akai tells him that this is lucky for them, as now the defense forces will have to deal with the other explosion, first giving them extra time to hide and figure this out. It turns out that another Kaiju has emerged from the ground, completely destroying a house, trapping a woman, while her daughter cries as she tries to free her from the fallen debris. The mother tells her to run away, but the child is adamant and tries to move the items, trapping her mother, but fails to do anything. Just then, the Kaiju appears behind them and breaks through the remaining wall to claim its food, but just as it opens its mouth to devour the poor girl, Kafka appears out of nowhere and punches him straight in the face, blasting it away. He surprises even himself with his power, but immediately turns his attention towards a little girl, asking whether she is okay. The girl starts crying out of fear, so he tries to lighten up the mood by making funny faces, but it all goes to waste, as his ugly face can make even Donald Trump cry. Thankfully, Akai comes to save the day and comforts the girl, while Kafka removes the fallen debris from her mother, quickly checks on the mother, and thankfully realizes that she is still alive and is just unconscious right now, before they can feel completely safe, though the Kaiju arrives once again, looking uglier than ever, to claim its prey. Kafka tells Akai to take the mother and the child to safety while he deals with the monster. Akai asks, what is he planning to do? And Kafka replies that he is going to punch the monster as hard as possible, hoping for the best Ekai, immediately runs away with the victims, while Kafka charges his punch that start glowing with electricity and delivers an uppercut so strong that it rocks the monster, completely blasting it in the air as it completely explodes into nothingness. Kafka is beyond shocked as a bloody rain starts as the remains of the monster falls to the ground